Well, not everyone's here, but it's time. And so we have some more video research presentations to see. And we'll start with chapter 32. That's kind of the agenda for today. And so we get rid of some of this stuff then.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma and I will be speaking on the creation of Adam by
Okay.
Angelo.
Let me get the volume set.
1511 to 1512. A little bit about the artist, Michelangelo.
Okay, let's start from the
Hi
beginning.
everyone, my name is Emma and I will be presenting on the creation of Adam by Michelangelo. He painted this piece in 1511 to 1512. A little bit about the artist. Michelangelo was born in 1475 in Italy. And he was a renowned Italian artist of his time, known for his work as a sculptor and his contribution to the art in the Sistine Chapel. He is considered the first artist to be recognized during his lifetime. And at a young age, Michelangelo became interested in women's arts. Was working with artists such as Giovanni, who studied the works of famous painters and sculptors and became keen in the portrayal of the human form. About the creation of Adam itself, Michelangelo was offered many commissions at the height of his career in 1504, the Sistine Chapel being one of them. Despite his skills, the challenges of completing the fresco were plenty. Of course, the height of the ceiling and the massive size of the building. But considering all of these hindrances, the entire ceiling was finished in less than 4 years, depicting over 300 figures in the narrative of creation, the fall of man, and subsequently the redemption. The scale and inherent dedication it took to complete the piece becomes evident when viewing the ceiling as a whole. However, it is important to look close at the panels and decipher the meanings. The creation of Adam panel appears as one of the central panels on the ceiling. When scholars began to analyze the painting, many aspects resulted in various theories. This first theory is the inclusion of the woman figure next to the creator. This sparked heavy debate. One theory suggests that the female figure is the depiction of Eve, or the idea of Eve. Her soft gaze directed toward Adam implies this idea. Another theory is that this figure is divine wisdom, which comes from the book of Proverbs. Divine wisdom is a female essence who, quote, accompanied the Lord from the beginning of creation, end quote. So this female presence likely reflects that of divine wisdom, as this theory has been corroborated by additional studies. But in my opinion, it makes more sense for the likeness of Eve to be present in God's gift of life and soul to Adam, as she plays an important role in Adam's life and the Christian belief in the first humans. But the identity of this woman is still up for debate. Another feature that appears in the creation of Adam is the appearance of the creator encased in a brain-like structure. So further research into anatomical details within the piece suggests that Michelangelo incorporated many renditions of the human body in his works, but specifically in the creation of Adam, God and his angels and the female essence appear in a cross-section of the human brain. Many have inquired as to what Michelangelo was referencing with this illustration. It is plausible that the creation of Adam painting is in reference to God giving Adam his spirit rather than building the human form of Adam. This would imply that Adam as a being had not been completely created until he gave him his spirit. Michelangelo's knowledge regarding the anatomy of the human body also leads us to believe that he likely had access to cadavers, which he was able to use to study and accurately depict aspects of the human body that most people hadn't ever seen. So the creation of Adam is an example of a high Renaissance painting. A few simple characteristics of Renaissance art include depictions of beauty and an overall pleasing aesthetic. This period also saw a move toward humanism, which is compelling artists to return to classical Roman and Greek philosophies concerning universal man and his place in the world. The use of old styles and new techniques defined the High Renaissance as a groundbreaking era. Linear perspective, highly accurate portrayals of human anatomy, and foreshortening, which is the technique of depicting an object or a human body in a picture so as to produce an illusion of projection or extension in space. These techniques are among those that were borrowed from early Renaissance artists and used in the creation of Adam painting. New styles also developed. Leonardo da Vinci is among those who contributed to this with his invention of a technique called sfumato, which is a glazing effect that revolutionized the blending of tone and color. And the creation of Adam is a wonderful example of high Renaissance art. The highly accurate anatomy of Adam, the use of foreshortening, and significant linear perspective. Each characteristic of high Renaissance art all appear in the fresco. The High Renaissance period also introduced ceiling art, so Michelangelo's work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling fits various characteristics of this artistic time period. Talking about the Sistine Chapel itself, it has been an important location since its construction in 1473. Today, it is still used as the location where cardinals meet to elect a new pope when needed. And before Michelangelo painted the ceiling, the walls were already adorned with frescoes by other famous artists. Previously, the ceiling had been painted blue with golden stars scattered throughout, which I think is a really cool depiction. So in order to paint the ceiling, not only did Michelangelo make his own scaffolding, he also developed a new way to apply a fresco that would fight against the possibility of mold. So working in a building requires many different aspects to be considered as opposed to working with canvas. So my interpretation of the work, the creation of Adam, is a work of art that has always interested me, although when I first saw it, I had no insight as to its importance in the art world. And I think I want to go back and show the picture. So the outstretched hands of Adam the Creator are extremely well known, but I don't believe the entirety of the painting has the same recognition. But for me, the touching fingers symbolize the spark of man, but I think there's a deeper connection, as if Adam and the Creator have been yearning to meet, almost as if they were once friends. And as someone who has little knowledge regarding the Bible, much of the symbolism and details within the piece go unnoticed to me, yet it still invokes an emotional reaction. And I think that's what I love so much about this painting, is the sheer beauty of it. It doesn't require one to completely understand the fresco's meaning. The relationship between Adam and God and the angels surrounding him signify the desire for human connection, which is something that most everyone can relate to, and why the appeal of the fresco seems to span across all demographics. To me, the color scheme is also visually appealing. With the mostly muted fleshy colors of the figures and the gray backgrounds, the overall composition feels dull until the splashes of color, the grass upon which Adam is laying, and the reddish pink of the brain containing the figures on the right, and the bright green of the fabric that is flowing out of the brain are all added to give that extra little flair. Michelangelo also incorporated implied lines and leading lines that, in my opinion, are an artistic aspect that greatly add to the allure of the piece. So yeah, that is my interpretation of the piece and my presentation on the creation of Adam. Here are my sources, and thank you all for listening.
All right, well, any questions, any comments for Emma? Did you guys get that announcement I sent out? About God being in this painting, the face of God is actually a selfie by Michelangelo himself. That was just on CNN just the other day, and I looked it up and I found that they had already posted a video, and I sent it along to you. I think that it really points to the cultural significance and importance of this work of art, that here it is in 2023, and we're still trying to figure this out, and scholars are still researching and trying to find new hidden secrets. And you mentioned that point where God's hand and Adam's hand kind of converge right there, right central in that composition. I've seen that part of this painting often referred to as the most significant and electric negative space in the history of Western art, because they're not really touching. It's just that little bit that they're separated by, but it brings you right there. And you can almost imagine that spark of knowledge. And, you know, for a long time, it had been life that was the interpretation. But after a while, after a few hundred years, people said, well, Adam is obviously already alive. This is knowledge, and that's where the significance of the brain comes in, and so on and so on. So the study goes on, even to this day. And so let's see Gabriel's presentation here on baptistry doors, and let me hey, come on.
The gates were constructed for the north entrance of the work that I
And it sounds like the audio is pretty good. So, and I want to see who came in here. Austin, okay. Without further ado, now it's too low. There it is.
I have chosen to talk about is Lorenzo Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise. The gates were constructed for the north entrance Giovanni, Florence. They were created during the High Renaissance in Italy and are considered one of the greatest pieces of Renaissance sculpture ever crafted. To this day, they remain in the baptistry in Florence and are regularly visited by travelers. The gates were created using the lost wax method of casting bronze for the panels. Then those panels were set into the colossal wooden door frames measuring 17 feet high. Before we talk about the art itself, we should first talk a little bit about its creator. Lorenzo Ghiberti's real birth date is actually not known for sure. At first, he gave his birth date as 1381. Then, in 1442, he changed it to 1378. This may have been an intentional decision on his part, as his birth was speculated to be illegitimate. In 1370, his mother married a man called Cioni Paltami Ghiberti in Palago, just outside Florence. Cioni was very wealthy, although Mona really did not love him. Cioni eventually died, after which Mona promptly married a goldsmith in Florence who she was living with at the time, Bartolo di Michele, referred to as Bartoluccio. It is assumed that Lorenzo is really the child of Bartoluccio, despite using the Ghiberti name. Growing up, he was raised by Bartoluccio and trained in goldsmithing and painting. He was also taught to read and write, although he was challenged in that regard, as proven by his signature on the Gates of Paradise, where he wrote the capital N's backwards. In 1400, a competition for the creation of doors for the baptistry caught Lorenzo's eye. He returned to Bartoluccio's workshop and won them the commission for the doors from the Arte de Camalia. Lorenzo took over ownership of the smithy in 1409 during the construction of the gates. At the time, he also was an architectural consultant. After winning the commission, Lorenzo worked on the gates for over 25 years. They were eventually installed in the baptistry in 1452, and then Lorenzo himself passed away in 1455. The subject matter of the Gates of Paradise is an incredibly detailed and nuanced telling of some of the most important stories from the Bible, separated into a series of panels depicting the different scenes. The first panel describes the beginning of creation, of Adam and Eve being created, their temptation, fall, and subsequent banishment from the Garden of Eden. The next panel depicts the tale of Cain and Abel, and Abel's eventual murder at Cain's hand, because God preferred Abel's offerings to Cain's, which made him envious. After this panel comes the story of Noah. Surprisingly, Gaberti focuses the narrative of these panels on the world after the Great Flood and how the world has changed as a result of the flood. After Noah, Gaberti shows us Abraham and Isaac's story. He depicts the scene of Isaac's near sacrifice with high emotional intensity through small details, such as Abraham using his finger to steady the raised blade, showing hesitation and internal conflict. Finishing Abraham and Isaac's panel brings us next to Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob managed to take Esau's inheritance for himself through deception of his old father. Continuing on, the next panel tells us about Jacob's son, Joseph. Joseph, the youngest of Jacob's 12 sons, had 2 prophetic dreams about how he was to be in power one day. His brothers, upset about these dreams, sold him into slavery in Egypt, where he gained the power he had his visions about, and he used his power to help his brothers in their time of need. After Joseph comes Moses. This panel depicts the creation of the tablets that had the 10 Commandments etched into them by God's finger, accompanied by violent weather all around Mount Sinai, which causes fear in the rest of the Israelites. The concurrent panel continues very soon after the place of the Moses panel ends, with the story of Joshua and his military victories made only possible through the intercession of God. Following Joshua is David, possibly the most important Old Testament figure. It depicts his slaying of Goliath the Philistine and his rule as king, as well as the king Saul trying to eliminate him, as he saw David as a threat to his throne. This brings us to the last panel in the gates, the panel of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Gaberti shows us an ornate temple of Jerusalem, and also shows us the scene of the Queen of Sheba bringing offerings to Solomon and testing his wisdom. With how large the doors are, Gaberti managed to depict almost all of the most important chronologies for the Old Testament. In addition to the panels containing all of these stories, they also have a large number of portrait busts around the sides of the painting. They depict various saints and historical figures. A notable amount of cultural significance for the people of Renaissance Florence comes from the images of Florence itself that Gaberti slips into each panel. Florence is represented in some form in almost every part of the gates. An example in the earthy panels can be found in the depiction of God, through the use of a crown that resembles one that the Pope would wear at the time in Italy. Use of this visual metaphor is rare, beginning with the image first shown in the St. Augustine's City of God. This both emphasized God as the leader of the church, but also at the same time reinforced the role of the Pope as the leader of the temporal church, the church on earth. This imagery fits with the times in Italy, with Pope Eugenius IV recently having been exiled to Florence. In the Joshua panel, we see more interesting imagery considering the religious and political landscape of Florence. It is entirely possible that Florentines could have interpreted the image of Joshua and his priests as a parallel for Eugenius IV and the rest of the church, leading his people into battle in the Crusade of Varna. In the panels of David, we see symbolisms in David's victory over Goliath. The meaning carried in this image for the Florentines lies in the divine assistance they had received in battles in the past, a direct reflection of how David slayed Goliath. In possibly the most direct reference to the city of Florence shown in Gaberti's work, the cityscape of Jerusalem is in fact lined with Florentine and Roman buildings. This duality once again brings to mind Eugenius IV, his exile in Florence, the papacy in Rome, and the city of Jerusalem, all tied into one visual representation in the David image. This can also be seen as a metaphor for a desire to unite the church, as the schism was causing a significant amount of tension at the time. Perhaps Ghiberti's ultimate wish was to see France, Florence, and Rome to be united as one metaphorical Jerusalem. Doing research on this work has really brought my attention to how incredible the art of sculpture was during the High Renaissance. When most people think of Renaissance, they think of the great painters like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. But the High Renaissance period has so much more to offer with this painting. Truly, that period was a grand time for almost every form of art, from painting to architecture and especially sculpture. I also find the representations of Florence and its fusion with biblical locations to be utterly fascinating and incredibly well executed. Truly, The Gates of Paradise is one of the greatest works from the Renaissance period.
Any questions? Comments? For Gabriel? Well, I have a couple of small things to add, and one of them is that Gabe was talking about the competition to create the doors of the baptistry, which is where the Gates of Paradise is, and those are the baptistry doors. And it was a magnificent building, and they wanted to get the best artist to do those doors. And what they wanted to do here was hold that competition, as Gabe said. One of the primary rivals of Lorenzo Ghiberti was Brunelleschi. His name doesn't come up so much in art, other than he entered that contest too. As a matter of fact, when he lost the contest, Brunelleschi decided that sculpture was not for him, and he basically became an architect and mathematician, and he designed the dome that was put on Florence Cathedral, which was like one of the most significant architectural achievements of the Renaissance too. So anyway, let's see, I got Izzy's right here too. Let's take a look. And let's see. Well, I'm gonna have to get some volume on this. Yeah, I'll pause and see if I can't get the volume up over here. And as good as I can get.
Going to extend their hours. That's not see the word. I'm over the ratio. Paris, France, still. They're so confident. So it was unlike anything before the scene at time. You'd see new techniques like Paris, from the perspective of many classical spaces that have stayed with the simplified architectural back taking place in a shallow state. Characters are carefully modeled and statuesque. forming stands, much like home architecture. The conflict between man and earth, linear, and then a rigid, upright, tall. They're angular, form, and appear strong. Sense of purpose is grown above the land, access, and bigger. The political turmoil of France, and the historical background. David's career is both focused and focused out of prevailing style of the time, highlighted highly ornamental and theatricals. David eventually traveled to Rome to study. He embraced the classical art traditions and rejected the schools of the political style. He wanted to push the perfect form to the play. This was defined by the use of and philosophers, questioning an established political and religious established. David begins applying these principles and attaching moral value to the subject of his works. Shortly after, when David becomes a politically engaged figure, he even rose from the beginning of the King James Revolution. He raises questions, established political figures. This new way is making outside of national. His beliefs started to be reflected onward, and began rejecting the political style. The psychology, their clients, and over does not form from theatrical plays. Just like David returns to ancient Greek and Roman cultures, as they were viewed as a pinnacle of civilized society. 1789, the French Revolution began, and the American Revolution had already taken place, based off the teaching of the French enlightenment philosophers. Goes back to the story of a period from Roman and Alba cities set to duel, the survivor being victorious and winning the war. This scene was shown the moment three Horatii were on swords held by their father, when they died of the Roman. Looking on his back, sorrow, the men seemed to dismiss them. This scenario is complicated by the intermarriage of the two families. The sister of the Horatii brothers, so wife to be the courageous sons of Alba. So no matter who wins the battle, they still both lose. David's portrayal of the one being so passive suggests a widespread belief at the time that he would think of civic responsibility. It's also related to sacrifice that family must endure for their country. Subject is the focus, patriotism and sacrifice. The willingness to die for the country that was presented in the painting resonated strongly with French audiences and neoclassicism, preferred artistic style to French Revolution. On the song paintings of revolutionary statement, but it was actually not very intended that way. It's painted under royal patronage. David saw the reaction, questioning the consistency of the poet and alignment principles to his work, pushing forward the classical art style. David believed paintings like the Ode to Horatii served to install patriotism, civic virtue, and the public at large. Paintings celebrated a Roman patriotism sacrifice, connected with the upset French viewers who wanted the revolution to break away from abuses of monarchy and begin a new republic. First saw Oath of the Horatii, and thought it was making a city. The organized composition, use of lighting and perspective seemed very intentional. Presented a timeless message of patriotism, sacrifice, family, and the ideal ways of life. The messages of this story and imagery may apply to even modern day, where we can be motivated to challenge the higher establishments that we disagree with and to stand up for what we believe in, and are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for it. The messages that we see in neoclassical works, especially David's Ode to Horatii, we can see in modern protest art. The most famous examples of this is Shepard Fairey's work, It's Obey. Shepard originally made the obey sticker as a joke, but after seeing the public's interpretation of the imagery on the internet, accompanied with words obey, is inspired to make work that challenge popular establishments and beliefs, use historical figures to inspire people to reconnect past knowledge with modern history. I am very influenced in my own artwork and designs to embed messages that make people stop and think, be able to be open for interpretation to apply to their own lives and beliefs. I feel that this connects with the neoclassical artworks such as the ADAH. David used the new principles he had embraced and applied them to the piece without fully intending to get such strong connection. Interactions to help motivate the French Revolution. Work that inspires action and change is extremely important throughout history and should always be used as a tool of voice. Thank you for taking time to listen to my presentation and sources.
All right, any questions, comments for Izzy? No? Well, I thought that I was kind of surprised at the end when you compared the Oath of the Horatii to Shepard Fairey's works. And I just want to say that protest art and politically charged art, and as you say, delivering a message, that's still alive and well, as you described. So I like that. And so, talking about that kind of work, let's take a look at this PowerPoint, and I want to slideshow from the beginning. And with this PowerPoint, I usually take these questions off, and I didn't do that. For this one, these are the ones that kind of come with this software that's provided by the textbook company. But see, here we go. Explain with examples how contemporary artists use art in differing ways to address pressing social and political issues. List examples of artists for whom gender and sexuality are central themes. Discuss whether contemporary art must be considered on a worldwide or global basis. All very relevant questions here. And I think that contemporary art must be looked at on a global basis. And I have the beginning of the chapter here that's kind of still American centric, but let me tell you about this. Jane Quick to See Smith, Trade is the title, Gifts for Trading Land with White People. And so here we go. And it's this painting part, it's painted in 3 panels. And if you take a look at how it's put together, in a lot of ways, this looks like a Robert Rauschenberg painting. This is what he did. He would put text, magazine pages, newspaper, print, different kinds of things under all the painting. And if you look closely at what Izzy showed with the Shepard Fairey and the John Lewis piece, you saw there was text underneath the painting. If you look close and zoom in on it, you can see that It's kind of difficult to read. It's been painted over and it's blurry. But here, that's what we got here. And a lot of this stuff is it's different kinds of things to be sure, but every once in a while you see these depictions here, depictions of Native Americans right here, here, and other significant people significant to indigenous culture. And so she's got this all painted in what is a modernist way. It's pretty much put together like a Rauschenberg. And this image here, oh, that too is almost Rauschenberg-esque, if you will. A canoe. The canoe, it's unique to North American indigenous people. It's synonymous. And especially if we would talk about this part of the continent where we have all of these rivers, and canoes were basically the interstate highways of the time, and these were the cars and the trucks go up and downstream, connected the people together. And the fact that the rivers were pretty much the interstate highways, that persisted after colonization, after all of the people from the original 13 colonies moved westward. They invented the steam engine, and we see steamboats going up and down the rivers right here in River City. Anyway, so this is about Native American people. And up here, she has all of these things that use Native American names, images, things to sell goods and things. And I gotta point this out. This was 1992. So what we're talking about here is what, 30 years ago, excuse me. So we have actually grown a lot in there. For instance, the Washington Redskins, and this being their logo, they're the Washington Commanders in the NFL. And some of these other things are bygone, but and like this one too, this is bygone. Cleveland Indians baseball team are now the Cleveland Guardians, and they don't have this guy here, Chief Wahoo was his name. Anyway, it's totally offensive. And the fact that she talks about gifts for trading land with white people. It's not only did we move across the continent and push a lot of the native peoples onto reservations, we were actually attacking their legacy and impugning their dignity with this kind of stuff. It kind of marginalized these people. And Jane Quick to C. Smith was doing this. I knew some other Native American artists that were doing some of the same kinds of things. There was a friend of mine, she died about 3 or 4 years ago, Shan Goshorn, and she took photographs of this stuff like this, like the Red Man Tobacco and all of this stuff, Cleveland Indians. And she did them in black and white, and then came back in with paint and painted red into either the depiction of the person or the word red or Cherokee. And so she had all kind of stuff like Cherokee, Jeep Cherokee, black and white photo, red Cherokee logo on the side. Anyway. Contemporary artists use art in differing ways to address pressing social and political issues. And it's not just the African American versus the white culture. Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I talk about this stuff being global. 1983, so this is like 40 years ago. I want to tell you that Basquiat's not around anymore. He died during the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s. But let me tell you about the work. He was one of the first to employ graffiti into high art. And you see all of these. This is all right out of Lower Manhattan, which was kind of a blighted area at the time, which is where a lot of the artists lived and worked back in the 80s. And he was there was artist community, and he would basically draw this stuff and write this stuff, and it was graffiti-esque. It wasn't quite as sophisticated as the graffiti that we'll see come out of that era, using spray paint and doing things in a much more educated way. This was very raw, and it was very, because it was so raw, it was honest. And so you see all of this stuff, and it relates to his culture. And he said oil and paint stick. Paint stick is like one of his favorite mediums, because you could just draw and write, do this kind of stuff without having to load your brush all the time. But Basquiat, and whoa, they made a movie about him after he died. Basquiat was actually one of the artists that really represented the 80s in a big way. And this guy here, that's David Bowie. You know who he's playing? Any guess? Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol saw Basquiat's work. Warhol was a great artist, but he was like a lot of artists, they're art fans too. They like to see what's going on around in the world, and especially in New York. And he found this guy. Actually, Basquiat found Warhol. And that's in this film, by the way. And he has all of these drawings that are very similar to what you see here. And you know what? Before I forget, I was picking up my granddaughter from school, and one of the teachers had a Basquiat t-shirt. I think you can get that. Maybe it's like, I don't know, you have to Google it. But bottom line is that it is really that popular and that famous. But he found Warhol, and Warhol immediately recognized the honesty, the rawness, the unschooled nature. What I mean by that is that some of you I know have taken drawing, studio drawing, either in high school, you're taking it here, studio painting, whatever. And typically in none of those classes will they teach you to make images like this. This is a guy who hasn't been taught all of that and making it up. That's what I mean by raw. And in its own way, it's kind of genius. And Warhol recognized that. And at the end of both of their lives in the 1980s, they collaborated. And Warhol made his paintings using the silk screens and style that he'd always had used for 50 years. And he had Basquiat come draw graffiti on top of the Warhol painting. And so that's in this movie. This guy here, I'm trying to remember his name. He was an art dealer. That's Dennis Hopper playing. Oh, it's been too long. Anyway, this is Basquiat here. And he was from the Caribbean. He was an immigrant. And anyway, yeah, I can maybe move this up because I want to show you the caption on that. Come on, cooperate. Thank you. In 1981, a 19-year-old unknown graffiti writer took the New York world by storm. The rest is art history. And actually, this movie was produced by another artist, Julian Schnabel, who was a big deal in the 80s too. But Harry James Marshall, the style. This is kind of a pun, if you will. Yeah, I showed you all that Mondrian stuff, the linear rectangles, the white and black grid with the primary colors. That was a self-described, named by Mondrian himself, this style, which was Dutch for the style. Harry James Marshall, he's taken this in a different way. The style's in the barbershop. I love Harry James Marshall. I love a lot of what he does. He paints about the African American experience, but he does these things that are really just, to me, just hilarious. He takes a lot of the words that we use and kind of turns them around in a whole different way. And if I might, let's zoom in here, because these are Black people. But if you know Black people, they're not really black. They're, they're human beings. They got dark color, dark skin. But this is a place where he takes the word Black that we use to describe African people and actually paints them black. He takes the language that we use to try to understand the culture and turns it all the way around. And so anyway, this is, he does a lot of stuff like that. And then he'll do these things. This is obviously the barbershop. And if you know, a lot of places in urban areas, big cities, barbershop is kind of like the big hang up. And as a matter of fact, back in the day, that wasn't peculiar to African American culture. That was the same thing all over the country. How many of you have seen the Andy Griffith Show? Old, I mean, like ancient time, black and white TV. And where do they spend a considerable amount of time? At Floyd's barber shop. And they all sit around, and they share gossip, and they tell stories, and they argue about things that may not even matter. Eddie Murphy did some stuff. He did a lot of comedy routines based on the barbershop. And who was it? Ice Cube barbershop and Barbershop 2, a couple of movies based on this. Anyway, taking African American culture and put it front and center with kind of a tongue-in-cheek attitude. Lorna Simpson, stereo size, black and white Polaroid prints, and again, about blackness. And in a lot of ways, got these adjectives that typically accompany a particular look, especially in African American style: daring, sensible. Oh, I can't read that one. Long and leggy, boyish, ageless, silly, magnetic, country trash. Ooh, sweet. Anyway, you see, they're going into this. They're actually, to understand a lot of this work, especially what was done in the 80s and 90s, you got to understand the language that arises when you're talking about this work or thinking about this work. And dare I say, how do you use the language? What does the language really mean? And if I could go back here to Jane Quick to see Smith, that's really what this is all about. This is like so far removed from Native American culture that you don't even, we got to a point where we don't even think about this stuff as being Native American. You know, think Atlanta Braves, baseball. Don't even think anymore about where that tomahawk chop comes from, you know. And so anyway, these artists are reasserting a lot of things. This guy here, Kehinde Wiley, Napoleon leading the army over the Alps, 2005. This is a little bit newer. And this is at the Brooklyn Museum. Did I show you guys this yet? Oh, I'm gonna take it as, no, I haven't. This is right out of, this is our guy, Jacques Louis David, Napoleon crossing the Alps. Napoleon leading the army over the Alps. What Wiley does, and I love this guy too, but and see, these guys are like all my age too, so. But bottom line, what's going on here? What Wiley did was to take these kind of iconic, paintings and artworks from Western art history and replacing the main character with African Americans. And in fact, he was just, when he painted, he would just pull somebody off the street, say, hey, I'll give you a couple $100. You want to sit and pose for me? He'd get what he needed, get the features down, let him go. And so anyway, the idea of inserting African Americans into this pretty much, how should I say that, selective, white European culture, and inserting exclusive was what I was thinking of, exclusive white culture and putting African Americans in there. And so anyway, let's see, I got enough time. I'm going to end that show right here. And what I'd like to do is open up a new tab and This guy. Yinka Shonaber, Nigerian British artist. And get some of these images. Some of this is a little more recent, but yeah, I know I need a photography. Yes, here we go. Nigerian British artist. And so he's got like his foot in two worlds. And he is in the London art scene, and he's Nigerian. And his message here, much like Kehinde Wiley, is what happens when you put African people, or should I say people of color, into the history. You get stuff like this, and this is right out of we were just talking about the Age of Enlightenment. This is like, excuse me, the Victorian era, Diary of a Victorian Dandy. And so you see, this is what the wealthy did, the maid, the musician, all of the people in all of their finery with all of their Victorian trappings. And here we go, central figure. Oh, it won't let me zoom in. There we go. Central figure, an African. And what Victorian Albert Museum, London. Okay, let's go. Let me see. I gotta figure out, I gotta navigate this guy. And I got this. Come up. Now I need it on the bottom. There we go. And so anyway, what a lot of his artwork is about is the effects of colonialism, and how, because European colonialism just kind of upset the order of things, the previous order of things, and it's kind of been in its own way, in some ways, replaced a lot of, in this case, Nigerian history with English history. And so anyway, whether you agree with these things or not, this is really pretty much what he's doing. And it's not unlike what Kehinde Wiley was doing in Napoleon Crossing the Alps. And so, there's another guy I wanted to show you, another African artist. Yeah. Let's see. I just put that in, and there he is, El Anatsui. And here he is. This is a picture of El Anatsui. And here's what he makes. And this is at the Brooklyn Museum. There's a lot of these around. He's very prolific. And 1,000,000 Pieces of Home. That was the title of the article. And so, can I zoom in? Oh, there it'll do. Earth skin. Check this out. If I could zoom in, what you would see is exactly what this is made out of. And as it talks about, it's a mosaic of sorts, and immense sheet of undulant light floating floor to ceiling. And it's pieced together. This is what I wanted to go with. Pieces of colored metal pinched and twisted into strips, squares, and circles and rosettes, linked together like chainmail with bits of copper wire. So when they talk about these bits of metal, it's all like right out of the dumpster metal. This is like, it's like sardine cans and other kinds of tin cans and all of this stuff. Every bit of it is like basically detritus, stuff that you would throw away. And he takes this kind of trash, honestly, what we would consider to be trash, and he makes it beautiful objects. And he relates to fiber artists in his own way, and in his own way, he uses some of the same tactics, because a lot of the fiber artists, as I was telling you before we started doing the presentations, a lot of women got back into fiber artists as a statement of this is a branch, a medium of artistic activity that one was not particularly recognized for the actual artistic value it has. And secondly, it was primarily in the realm of women artists. And so that's all gone, you know, see, we're talking about 2007. We moved past that, and people are taking some of the things that the fiber artists were doing, and they were hanging their quilts up, or their fiber arts pieces up, to take advantage of all of the folds, all of the pieces, the way the light and space exist. And so it becomes kind of like what we were talking about, Gilberti's low relief sculpture. That's kind of what this ends up being too, except on a grand scale. So it's sculptural, it's fiber art. And when you see this up close and you see that it was put together with this little copper wire, I hope you get to see some of this sometime, because it's almost like jewelry making. And the word that comes to mind for me is alchemy. What is alchemy? Anybody? Yeah, it's an ancient science. It was kind of a pseudoscience, but people practiced it for a long time, even including such notable scientists as Sir Isaac Newton. Alchemy was the science of turning base metal into gold. And for a long time, scientists, chemists, they thought that they could do that. That if you took some lead or some tin or iron or something, that if you process it properly, you could turn it into gold. That was the science of alchemy. And it kind of had its origins in ancient mythology, that there were people that knew how to turn base metals into gold. And up to and including King Midas, who could touch something and turn it into gold. So that the idea of something being gold is something that you could make. And certainly, there was a profit motive, and a big clump of iron ore, and you turned it into gold, you just became a billionaire. Anyway, but that's what this is. He's turning all of this base materials into gold. You get, and you look at it, and you're standing before it, and you get the feeling that, my God, this is like jewelry. This is so elegant. This is so amazing. And so, and so, and that's at the Brooklyn Museum, where a lot of stuff is. And You see, there's a bunch of these, and pretty much alike, alike in how he puts them together, and very unique in what they are. And so I'm at this point again. I have too many windows open. It's not working. So we'll talk more about world art. There's a guy I really want you to see on Wednesday, a guy named Ai Weiwei. He combines a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about. And so enjoy the rest of this beautiful day, and I'll see you on Wednesday. And don't forget to put those entries in on the discussion. It's going to close tonight, but a lot of them have been put in already too, much to your credit. So. All right. Thank you. Thank you. See you soon.